So to warm up for this session, what we're going to do is invite each of our panelists to express some views, and then we're going to sort of open up more of a group discussion on these things. All of this, of course, is set within the context of the hierarchy for packaging of reduce, reuse, recycle, recover. We all know why we're so interested in this as a topic, but I think we also need to pause slightly if I can characterise some of this debate as being a Guardian readers debate, and actually not all households and all consumers in this country live in that context. So to take my own community in South London, half of our housing is social housing, a high proportion of that in mid and high rise. They don't have a garden, let alone a compost bin. 86% of them don't have access to a car, so can't necessarily take their packaging to a recycling centre. So we need to think about the collection system and what happens once that end-of-life packaging is collected, and how we integrate the whole system. The consumer is the weakest link in the circular economy. We have a corporate management of all those resources going around the whole cycle, apart from that little bit where we give our stuff in packaging to 60 million people and then expect it magically to come back to us. So that's what this afternoon's debate is on. The panel have had warning of the kind of 5 areas that we want to look at, which is reducing confusion for consumers by having more consistent collection systems, thinking about when is plastic too difficult or is it not cost effective to recycle it, and what's the answer to that? Should we be improving infrastructure or should we just be giving up on that plastic? Should we be exporting our plastics, and if so, are there limitations on where to? And how do we fund what needs to happen within the collection system and who's responsible? So I've asked each of them to pick their own pet issue and give us 3 minutes on that, and then we'll explore and debate that more fully. So Mike, could you start us off? Do stand up if it feels more comfortable to stand up.
Yeah, because then I can see people. Hello. So yeah, as I said, I've been on the Recycling Association stand for the last 2 days, and it's been absolutely amazing to get a lot of opinions and people coming up, asking about packaging, about different materials, about things they're struggling with, how they can do things better. So I want to kind of send out the message from our point of view about communication and collaboration, and really not leaving out the recycling part of the supply chain when you're looking at packaging from design point of view all the way through to the consumer. I think it's a really important topic because even small changes in material can have a huge effect. We've looked after a site for over 5 years that sent really lovely material into a paper mill in the UK. That site then changed the kind of paper they used. It was for coffee cups. They changed the supplier, simple as that. They didn't tell us. All of a sudden, this paper mill have got huge rejections. Their machines are breaking down because the fibers are just made in a slightly different way. So I think it's really important that we bring everything together. I love hearing about all the ideas about biodegradable and compostable, but I think especially in that situation, we haven't got the infrastructure at the moment in the waste management industry to segregate those kind of materials from materials we're looking for and looking to recycle. So we really need to work that out before we start jumping into different products and different materials like that. But again, we're here to talk to people, we're here to listen, we're here to give answers if we can. It's not always a positive answer. If there's contamination that the industry can't deal with, we'll tell you that. But let's keep talking together, I think.
Thank you. Yep, go for it.
Can I come up there?
Yeah.
I wrote some stuff down, so I didn't say the same thing. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I made some notes because I didn't want to start going down some rabbit holes that I could have done after listening to some of the comments from the previous session. So my brief was for a 5-minute review. We're now down to 3 minutes, so I'll focus on, I think, 3 possible drivers that I believe would help us address some of the key challenges facing the waste management industry, certainly with respect to single-use packaging, which is the big bugbear at the moment. But first, to be very clear, I don't believe that the tail should wag the dog. Good packaging plays a key role in preserving products, and from a life cycle point of view, a sort of database point of view that I absolutely believe in, clearly conserves more resources than it consumes. So my comments are really directed at perhaps bad packaging in quote marks, or at least non-recyclable packaging. And I do suffer quite a lot by companies bringing packaging to me and saying, could you develop a bespoke recycling system for this? When the packaging is clearly not going to work in any consumer recycling system. It's a one-off, it's a this, it's a that, could you do something with it? 3 different types of plastic, heat welded, a rubber seal, a gasket, a spring in it, crazy. So I think we need the designers to kind of, get a grip and really apply the learnings that they've got as they're being trained, rather than being forced to deliver, the high value add that seems to be being demanded in the industry. So the first driver that I think would help would be an incentive for manufacturers and retailers. And that would be a tax on single-use plastics, which are either not recovered, so greater than 70% capture rate, for example, or do not contain at least 30% recycled content. And the Commission are already talking about a recycled content limit, so this is very much on the radar of the policymakers in Europe. This will stimulate demand for recycled materials. We will collect more, and local authorities will benefit on the value front. It'll also reinforce producer responsibility and develop stronger markets for recycled plastic, developing investment in domestic infrastructure, one of the challenges that was mentioned earlier. Driver 2 would be an incentive for the consumer, and Jane mentioned this, to simplify, a deposit return system, which again is being talked about in Scotland and looks like it's going to come to life, to capture more material away from home. This will help consumers to be more environmentally conscious and will provide a financial incentive, something that is lacking at the moment. And this will help drive behaviour change and reduce litter, a major benefit. But it needs to be done in tandem with the existing recycling systems. We can't develop parallel systems because there'll be additional costs that just won't stack up. And the final one would be to make it easy for the consumer and make it competitive or more competitive for the retailers. And as I said, exactly what Jane suggested, let's simplify the on-pack labelling. Somebody in our office suggested the green refuse collection vehicle for a truly recyclable product, so competing with the red tractor mark, for example. But it would give consumers a choice, and it would remove confusion, and the waste industry could actually advise on what is and what isn't recyclable. I do fear when I hear about so much is being put on, it can go in the composting. We are the biggest composter in the UK. All of our compost gets sold as an organic compost. It meets certain criteria and it's used by consumers. I don't want it contaminated with material which in isolated studies may break down, but when put in large amounts into our compost could well clump together and cause processing issues, or leave residues, or cause confusion from consumers because they can't tell the difference between the compostable packaging and the non-compostable packaging. The field's wide open. Thank you.
That's great, thanks, Chris. And I think that sets up just nicely, Peter. So how does the Plastic Pact help, perhaps?
Yeah, I want to talk about the Plastic Pact, but Jane, I wondered if I could tell you a little bit about what I had for evening meal last Tuesday night. So I'm slightly different here. So I'm going to talk to you not as a director of RAT, but as someone who is a busy person going about their lives. And so Tuesday evening, I was working quite late, and I got back late, and I knew my wife was out. I knew my daughter was out enjoying herself, so I was on my own. I nipped into Tesco, to get a quick meal. I was hungry. And yes, I'll tell you what I bought. I bought some noodles, Asiatic noodles. It was wicked from Tesco's. Went home, put it in the microwave, ate my dinner. I felt a lot happier. Then I went to clear up. And it was absolutely great because this meal had 3 pieces of packaging. It had a single polymer polypropylene tray, it had a single polymer rigid polypropylene lid, and it had a small cardboard sleeve on the top. And on the cardboard sleeve it said very clearly that everything was widely recycled. And it was very easy for me then, because actually I live in a local authority, one of 80% of local authorities in the UK that will take pots, tubs and trays, as well as cardboard, in the recycling. I was able to quickly wash out the tray and the lid. I put all 3 parts of my packaging into my recycling bin. And I know, and I put my Wrap Director hat on now, and I know that that cardboard will be sold at a really quite a high value to somebody who wants to buy cardboard. And I know those polymers will be sold, baled up as polypropylene, I don't know, maybe £300 a tonne. A lot of value, and it will go into another market, and that is what recycling. So I buy my meal. I had a great meal. I was able to recycle it, and I know my local authority is going to collect it, and I know it will be recycled and sorted, and I know it will be reprocessed, and I know it will go back into a market, and that's what we are trying to do. So brilliant. So what I'd like packages to do, and I know that the major signatories of the UK Plastics Pact, I know what they're doing. They are thinking just in that way. How are they going to rationalise the number of polymers they're putting on the market so that all their polymers, all their packaging, plastic packaging, is recyclable? Nearly all those, I think just about every member of the UK Plastics Pact is part of OPRL, so they will be really clearly labelling it. So we have a real opportunity to really crack on with recycling in this country. And actually create value. And I think it's a huge opportunity for packaging designers to kind of really kind of align with that opportunity and make sure that your clients get the right packaging that they can recycle. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Now, we know that the Welsh are putting the rest of the UK to shame on much of this, and in a report done for the World Economic Forum this January came out 3rd in the world in terms of achieving recycling. So great to hear some thoughts on how thinking has developed and what's already been tackled. Andy.
You've just stolen my best line on that. So Wales, it's that place off to the west. Some of you may not know about. We have our own international football team, which does quite well. Our own international rugby team, and on the same lines, we have our own national parliament, i.e., assembly. And from 1999 onwards, we're able to make our own laws, particularly for waste. So waste has been fully devolved, and we've used our waste powers to the maximum extent. So much so that we set statutory recycling targets for our local authorities of 70% by 2025, and they're currently on 64%. I think the rate in England is around 44%, not that it's a competition. We're also looking to consult soon on a recycling target of 80% for 2035. So, as Jane said, we are leading the way, 3rd in the world. If we were a separate nation, we almost are, but not quite. So we're doing quite well, but we want to be number 1. That's what our minister has set a little target for us. Plastic is obviously a key area for recycling. According to our figures, determined by some composition analysis study, 66% of our dense plastic was collected for recycling. Can't guarantee all of it was actually recycled, of course. So the big challenge for us is how to get more plastic recycled, particularly the plastic film, for example. We've so far had to wait for everything to happen elsewhere, i.e. outside of Wales, but now things really are starting to happen. And as the only government representative here, I think it would be remiss of me not to mention extended producer responsibility. UK government, Scotland, Northern Ireland and ourselves are very committed to the principle of extended producer responsibility for packaging. That means every item of packaging that you design and put onto the market, the company that puts it onto the market will have to pay for the end-of-life cost of its management. It might have to pay for the consequences of its littering. And just throw it out there, you as designers, there is an environmental damage cost associated with certain litter. Now, I don't suspect that may or may not be covered under extended producer responsibility, but please consider that in your design, and particularly items that end up in the sea and in the ocean basins. We will not eliminate litter, sadly, particularly in this country. Having observed behaviours elsewhere in the rest of the world, we have a big litter problem. So things like sweets, crisp packets, no matter how much enforcement, how many litter bins there are, I think some of those items will always be littered and will always end up in the oceans. So think about the material that you use to design, for that packaging if it ends up in the ocean basin. Do we want it to stay there for hundreds, thousands, maybe millions of years, and the consequential damage that has? So that is the challenge, really, that you face today, thanks to the Blue Planet and all the other concerns that the public are coming across. So I think that's, I've said enough, I think. Thank you.
Thanks. So thank you very much, Andy. I will come to the audience shortly for questions, so please have a think about what you want to ask. But just to kick us off, I'd just like to ask the panellists, so we hear a lot from consumers about confusion as to whether something is recyclable or not, because local authorities have different collection systems. We also, I think, are increasingly debating, well, is it also because we have too wide a number of polymers? Plastic is plastic to the consumer. You can't expect them to understand what's polypropylene and what's PVC. So should we be constraining the choices local authorities can make in the services they offer, or constraining the plastics that packaging can be made from, or both? And which do you think is most important? So I'll take you in reverse order this time. So Andy, can you kick us off?
I mean, this is an enormously complex issue. It is a mixture of having too many different types of polymers. For example, I think it's yogurt pots, and Peter will correct me if I'm wrong. Some are made out of polystyrene, some are made out of polypropylene. Polystyrene can be recycled, but rarely is through local authority collection systems. Polypropylene, certainly in Wales, is collected for recycling, but of course then it's contaminated with the polystyrene stream. So if only the brands who make yogurt pots, who make yogurt, could decide between themselves which polymer to use, hopefully polypropylene. Local authorities have a completely impossible situation in terms of the materials that are put onto the market. They also have their local democracy and wish to do things their own particular ways. We've had endless debates, I'll put it politely, with our local authority officers who are convinced that the way they do it is the way it should be done and the way their public want it done. We have tried to get consistency. So we have 12 of our authorities doing curbside sort out of 22 using our collections blueprint approach. Another 2 authorities are definitely changing. Another 2 authorities probably will change. So the majority of our local authorities and households will have proper curbside sort. But that relies on people understanding through the labelling exactly where to sort their packaging and what to put it in. Really, the biodegradable, compostable packaging side of things is an issue that needs resolving. Those who put that sort of packaging onto the market under extended producer responsibility have an obligation to think of end of life and to label it appropriately and pay for the management of that material at end of life. That's what extended producer responsibility means.
Yeah.
Are you covering that later?
We'll come on to that, I don't doubt. Peter.
Yeah, I mean, not really too much to add to that. So the question really was about are consumers confused about the polymers? And I think yes. I think it would be unacceptable to expect consumers to really understand all the different types of plastics and polymers out there. So I think the onus is on the producers to harmonise and simplify the number of plastics actually used in most of the packaging we put on the market in the UK. And I can tell you that from working with the people who have signed up to the Plastics Pact, that as Jane alluded to, certainly for the rigids and the bottles, they really are focusing on three polymers, and that is high density polyethylene, polypropylene, and PET. And you will see that things like PVC and polystyrene will disappear from those specifications. I'm pretty confident of that. I think, just other to note, some people are more ambitious. So people like Mike Barry of Marks and Spencer's has stood up and said, well, wouldn't it be great if we just had one plastic that could do everything? So that is a really aspirational stuff. So great on Mike to think about that, but he's thinking about how we can make it simple for consumers. And another little twist on this, so in terms of your packaging design, it's very easy to think about the main pack, but I'd like you all to think about, specifiers, but also designers like you thinking about the tops and the labels and things like that. So you will probably know that if you have a PET bottle which has got a PVC sleeve on it, it's not going to be very easy to recycle. So some brands will certainly be wanting to get away about that. You've just got to think about the pack, the label, the ink, the glue, the top, everything. And that all comes into the equation when we look at the economics of recycling and reprocessing that people like Veolia have to worry about. Thank you.
It gets easier as you get to the end of the line, which is great. I think it's a fallacy that different systems cause confusion. I don't think people move house often enough for moving into a new region and having a different waste management system. I don't think that's huge. I don't think the swirl in the UK is big enough. I think the main challenge is, as we've said, the range of products that are available to consumers and being able to identify whether they're recyclable or not, and the look-alike products, the similar products, and then the wraps, the laminates, the layers, etc. We have got opportunities to educate consumers. We spend time and effort with our municipal partners trying to educate consumers. So flyers, handouts, emails, digital media on the increase. But there is only so much information we can give them. We're quite pleased if people put the recyclables, broadly speaking, in the recyclables bin and the rest waste in the rest waste bin. That's the level we're still operating at. When you have to have sophisticated choices on packaging, the majority of consumers just don't do it. So we need simplicity. We need an easier way for consumers to make the right decisions. I've heard talks about various apps and scanning things, but again, I don't think people are going to scan the rubbish, unfortunately. I'd love them to be perfectly honest, but I just don't think they will. We can put labels on bins which help people visually, but as I say, there is such a broad spectrum of stuff out of there. So the simplification of packaging, as already mentioned, is going to be key for us to capture better quality material. And the better quality material we capture, we can then recycle it at a much more competitive price, and it will be available as recyclate to be reused in the market at a price lower than virgin. The challenge at the moment is when we have to really clean very contaminated material, it is getting very close to or above the price of virgin. It doesn't make it a natural circular choice for manufacturers. If you can buy your virgin material cheaper than recycled, why would you use recycled? We're all running businesses. So simplification would really help from our point of view. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Mike?
I agree with some of those points and disagree with others. I think the simplification of the collection system is really important actually, because a lot of people are coming up to us and asking, okay, what can we put on our packaging to make it easy for the consumer? And the answer is, well, we're not really sure because it depends where they are and where they live, so you can't actually tell them that much without potentially getting it wrong. So I think we do have to simplify the collection system so that you can actually communicate what to do with that packaging. And yeah, obviously it's got to be recyclable and a simple plastic, so that's extremely important, which these guys went over.
Yeah. Well, I hope, Forbes, you're wrong about the app, because we're launching ours next month in Leeds as a pilot to see how it might assist on-the-go recycling, which I think is slightly different from from curbside home recycling, but we'll see. And it is one of the tragedies of this world that the under 35s talk a lot about recycling and hardly do it. And you need to be a granny of my age to be in the right age group for being a good recycler, I'm afraid. So there we go. So do we have some questions from the audience? One here. Do we have a microphone? Yeah. So a gentleman here and a lady behind him.
Hello, Rudolf Kalbeck. So I asked a similar question yesterday. It was on the subject of what happens to stuff at the bottom end of the recycling hierarchy when you get down to the recovery area, which is something we've hardly talked about here today. But we have one of the country's experts in recovery, Veolia, here today, and they run energy from waste plants. And since that is probably one of the few practical solutions for dealing with all the materials that can't be recycled in a more productive way, I'd be interested to hear Forbes' views as to whether we could do more of this in the UK, whether we could become more like Denmark, and whether we should be encouraging other countries to do it, particularly in Asia or Africa, rather than putting their rubbish into the oceans.
Okay, Forbes, take that.
We do operate incinerators with energy recovery infrastructure in our municipal contracts. They are ideal for getting value back from the residual fraction from our material recovery facilities, like you say. And it's certainly better than the alternative, which is putting them into landfill. There has been, I think, historically, the argument about, well, the ability to burn takes away the incentive to recycle. The data I've seen historically doesn't back that up. Good recycling systems capture good material. The process that we have, I mean, chocolate bar wrappers do not get collected for recycling. They are too good at what they do. There's too little material to make it viable. It's often contaminated. The best thing to do with that is to burn it for energy recovery. So I think there's a place for it. I think with respect to could we grow the infrastructure, I think the infrastructure is still growing. There is still capacity. We export refuse-derived fuel into Europe, which we could burn in the UK and contribute low-carbon energy into our grid. So it's doable. The carbon balance is still better than landfill, but I think there will be a point at which, you know, you don't want any more incinerators. The last thing you want as an operator is have a big facility that you cannot run at maximum capacity, because they're very expensive.
Andy, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, we want everything to be recyclable, but at the moment it obviously isn't. So anything that is very difficult or can't be recycled, we are content for it to go to energy from waste rather than landfill. When I started, I think we were landfilling 95% of our municipal waste, and now it's 9%. So the difference between our recycling and landfill is energy from waste. But we've done an analysis of our residual household waste, and half of it is easily recyclable. So 25% is food waste, 25% is dry recyclables. So we do not want those materials to go to incineration. The challenge, of course, is the price differential between incineration and recycling, where our local authorities have got to spend more effort trying to get those last few recyclables out. And so it's easier for them to send it for energy from waste because it's cheaper. Now that is an issue that needs looking at, because we do not want those materials to go to energy from waste.
Lady here had a question.
Hi. I just wanted to know, are there any future plans to help with the recyclability of crisp packets?
Who wants to take that one? Peter.
Well, I mean, I think the point about the recyclability, I think it's a design problem. I think it's really up to designers to think about what kind of materials and how they put the pack together. The recyclability is really, you know, something for designers and material scientists to think about. And I think Andy's trying to come in now.
Yeah, under the potential new extended producer responsibility regime, subject to consultation, a modulated fee may or may not be set for different types of packaging. So something like a crisp packet that is very difficult to recycle might have an incredibly high modulated fee to persuade the brands and packaging designers to think of a different type of packaging material that would be more recyclable to reduce the cost.
Okay, so if the film hasn't
The
been
hands are
through
going up.
production and it has been contaminated with the crisps, then this can be recycled. So it's like the cleaning that the recycling plant that we need to look at. So if that was in place, then we would be able to already recycle some of the crisp packets that we're already using. So is there something that in the future, that's what we're looking at doing?
Okay, so I just think it makes me think actually. Dick Searle mentioned in the previous session something called chemical recycling, and so this is not just about separating the polymers mechanically, is what we think about recycling today. It's about getting those polymers, breaking them back down to the original molecules, chemicals, you might say, and then building them back up into polymers again. So that's the kind of a new technology that's been coming through. There's a few people in the UK already starting to pilot that. And so I think for the what you might call the film, the flexible, the crisp packets, that is an option that will come, will hopefully emerge in future years.
Okay, so we've got lots of questions. I'm going to ask people who haven't previously asked first.
My name's Chris Radway from Circular Economy Consultancy, Circulonomy Limited. I just wanted to ask a slightly different question here. We've been talking about things which are, well, in my view at least, mainly littering impacts on the one hand, and then recyclability impacts on the other hand. But what about the carbon impacts of plastics? And I'm quite interested to see that Coca-Cola's already got their plant bottle, which contains 30% of bio-origin PET. Now, of course, a lot of consumers get confused between bio-origin plastics and compostable plastics, which is, very understandable confusion. But actually, this is bio-origin plastic PET made from plant wastes, actually. So along with this idea of using bio-origin plastics and, of course, recycling, what are the panel's views on this route towards reducing the carbon impacts of plastics used for packaging? Thank you.
So, Michael Forbes, do you want to start with that?
Yeah, I'm happy to start. I think as long as the polymer is molecularly identical, then it will go into the recycling stream and it can be recycled using conventional recycling processes. If it's not molecularly identical, then we have problems. Then we're talking about a contamination issue. So again, a lot of this is coming down to how you communicate to the customer, or the consumer, sorry, and how the consumer can be incentivized or enabled to put it in the right place.
Yep.
I would agree with that.
Mike, your microphone.
I would agree with that, and I think obviously there has to be a very thorough life cycle assessment be done for these kind of things. It's very easy to think, because we're kind of doing it in the biological cycle, this idea that it's all nature and therefore it's all very good. I mean, what we do know is that plants are quite important for food. Land is very important for growing food, and so there's a whole load of issues, not just carbon, but including biodiversity and everything like that needs to be considered. But I certainly think that's a very the concept is an original concept which should be explored. I would certainly support that.
Yeah. So the proper Mike, it's your members who have to cope with whatever comes out of this.
Yeah, and I think Forbes answered it very well. It's all about the structure of what they're receiving. As long as they can process it, that's absolutely fine. If it's going to cause contamination, then it's not. It's pretty simple, really.
And is there also the possibility of it's recyclable but at reduced value?
That's a more complicated question. It's all about the end product that you're able to get out of the material, and obviously the customers. And if it's the same molecular structure, there shouldn't be any difference to the end product. So I shouldn't see that being a problem. If that changes the product and there's contamination in the product, then you're talking a different game. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks. Now there's somebody over here, and then I've got one there, and Richard in the front.
Hi, I'm
Another
Harry.
one over there.
So you talked about simplifying knowledge for consumers. I was wondering what you thought of the idea of changing the whole structure in supermarkets. Rather having your aisles with beets, listed, why don't you have aisles with different plastics? Aisles which are recyclable, aren't recyclable, aisles that are gradable, That way, it's just there's a very clear message to the consumer which works. Just wondering what you thought of that idea.
You've never been shopping with me, obviously. Well, so I'll tee something up. I mean, what we have to remember is, for the consumer, packaging is just something that arrives by accident in their, because what they're buying is the product. There are consumers who are very concerned about packaging and recycling, but for most of them, it's just something they deal with, suddenly realise they've got it in their hand and they need to do something at the end of the day. They're not going to choose what they buy on the basis of what it's packaged in. They might pressure their favourite brand to change to something they like better, but if they like that product, they're probably not going to give up buying it. So they shop because, according to, I want to go down an aisle that's got cans of beans on and then an aisle that's got cereal boxes on. That's the way they look at it. Peter?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting idea, but I kind of agree really with Jane and about when consumers go into supermarkets, they're thinking about the food and the idea of having. I'm not an expert on store design, but you can imagine that it would be fairly complex and high cost for the retailer, and that would actually only end up adding to the cost for the consumer.
And I think when we talk about simplifying, we're not talking about simplifying the choice of which product you're going to buy. We're talking about having all of the aisles with one polymer, or all of the aisles with carton board, or one product. That's what we're talking about with simplifying.
Right. So I had a question here, gentleman with a beard.
Yes, I was just going to follow up with the extended producer responsibility idea, legislation that you say is coming in, and you were saying that there would be some kind of financial penalty for the companies producing this material if it was unrecyclable or undealable with. And I was just wondering, is there also mechanisms in place to prevent the producer then passing on those extra costs just directly to us, the consumer, and not paying for it themselves?
That is a very good question. Under the current packaging regime, I think it's something like £70 million it costs the producers. They either take a hit in their profits or they do put it onto the price of the item. That is up to the individual brands to decide what best to do in a very commercial market. They will have to bear a much, much greater cost. There's a rule of thumb at the moment that they only pay about 10% of the overall cost for the local authority collection side of things. So the marketplace is talking about a figure of 600 to 700 million pounds instead of 70 million pounds. So yeah, I mean that cost will either have to be borne by the brands or the manufacturers themselves, or passed on to the customer. So then it's the customer paying for the management of the packaging, waste that they've bought, rather than the general public through general taxation. That's a matter for debate through the consultation process.
So Forbes and Mike, if we move to this system where we're looking at several multiples of the current amount being available to invest in our infrastructure and in engaging consumers, what do you think the chief changes that we need to see in the first instance? And I'm thinking in a world where, exporting our waste and asking other people in Southeast Asia to solve the problem for us is becoming less and less acceptable.
The export question is a really interesting one. We rely heavily on exporting our material to all over the world, including Europe. It's a really important part of our economy and our recycling systems, and we definitely need it to go hand in hand with our domestic market. But yeah, you're right in the fact that you're implying that it's because we don't have the system set up in the UK to reprocess enough material in the UK, and that's absolutely right as well, because it's not cost effective. Whether this system will promote that, I think that's the intention, and I hope that that does come to fruition. But that will need some, I think, control over where the money is spent, because at the moment, it's almost, the PRN at the moment, it almost acts as a profit buffer, and it just makes it commercially viable to actually move products within the system, and it doesn't necessarily get segregated and put towards the future or infrastructure, even though it's supposed to. So hopefully it will, but it needs to be regulated quite closely, I think.
Yeah. And Forbes, I don't know if you saw Lord Debon's contribution yesterday, but one of his thoughts was that actually the value of the permits should in effect be much higher for anything processed within the UK economy and discounted for anything that goes outside of the UK. So you get less money for PERNs than PRNs. What kind, is that a way forward, and what kind of impact could it have in terms of growing the circular economy here in the UK?
I think it could be part of the way forward, because the export PRN does attract material out of the country, and we're seeing that. We're seeing lack of, we're seeing I can give HDPE for those involved in milk in the room. HDPE, recycled HDPE is an all-time high, trading $5.50 to $5.80 for a bale of HDPE bottles, absolute all-time high, and making it very difficult to do economically viable recycling in the UK. This material, the material in the UK, is selling outside of the UK. So if we leveled the playing field and made it easier to recycle to keep the material in the UK, I'd still like to be able to trade globally. I believe, what we've got are commodities. And if the demand is enough, why shouldn't we be able to sell it outside of the UK? But we also need to be able to sustain our own recycling infrastructure. So it is a balance.
Yeah. And Peter, with one of the aims of the Plastics Pact being to increase the level of recyclate in packaging, do we want to hold on to it here in the UK?
Yes, so there's several things here. So I'd like to pick up the point that Forbes made there about export markets. I mean, to be really clear, there's a myth here that somehow we're kind of exporting a lot of rubbish abroad. The reality is that there are other countries abroad who want our materials. So, for example, we are a very affluent nation. We import lots of things from Southeast Asia, our electronics goods. As a result of that, we import lots of cardboard. In the UK, we cannot use all that waste cardboard, that recycled cardboard, so we have to export it back to China so it is used again. So actually, in a global way, you're seeing the circular economy. It's exactly the same for plastics. So the same way that I'm sure you and your businesses look outside the UK for business, so does the recycling and reprocessing sector. That's a really important point to make. But what I do think is that you've seen in the last 2 years is that China, as a huge market, it's really been using its market power. And, it's beginning to China itself is taking the environment a lot more seriously. It is actually a leading nation now in terms of circular economy thinking. They are thinking about their resources, and they have decided that they can, start turning the tap off, and they're putting pressure on us. So I think the result of what China is doing and other countries in the Southeast Asia is that we have to add quality to what we are reprocessing in the UK. So quality materials we can export around the world in the same way that we might export other goods, high quality manufacturing goods from the UK, which is perfectly valid. So I think, going back to the point, the question Jane asked me, yes, we will need infrastructure in the UK to turn some of these recycled materials back into quality materials that meet a very clear specification, and yes, they have high value. So it's a huge, exciting opportunity for the UK to really get in the cutting edge. And what you'll see in the UK Plastics Pact, one of the targets we've got on the UK Plastics Pact, is that by 2025, 30% of all packaging that is placed on the market by the Pact members, and I would say that's about 1 million tonnes of plastics packaging, so 30% will have to be recycled content. So that's what they've committed to. Okay, so they're doing their bit for the circular economy. So
that's
therefore,
all right.
we will
I'll do-
therefore have to be building infrastructure and building, developing the right skills and capacity to really upgrade what we're doing. So it's a really exciting time. And again, go back to the point about designers. You guys have a real role in thinking about the plastics you're putting on the market in the first place, the packaging you're putting on the market in the first place.
So we're right up against time. We're going to be thrown out of the building shortly, I think. So I just sort of final reaction from Andy there.
Yeah, just a quick comment. I mean, it's not
Apologies
just
to those we haven't been able to
it's
take.
not just plastic recyclate that needs to be in packaging. It's all materials that you use in your packaging should have a high recycled content. Why not? I mean, you're making packaging that lasts a very limited time, so let's make the maximum use of the resource that goes into it by using more recyclate. Plenty of opportunities there.
Great, thanks very much. I think one thing we can be sure of, this debate is not going to go away. It has presented wonderful opportunities for a lot of people I know within the packaging sector who have wanted to move to change for years. And now with the public pressure and the impact on brand, if you don't address these issues, it's given permission for us to make those changes. Government is fully engaged. We can expect to see all the UK governments pressing for further change. And when we come back to this debate in 6 months' time in Birmingham or a year's time back here, hopefully, Josh, we'll be talking in a different context because the world will already have moved on. Thank you very much for staying the course and for your questions.